that has creeped in to many of the practices of the Ummah. But the big idea of Tawheed has been preserved by the Ummah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an answer to the prayer of Abraham. Today our topic is be the gardener of your soul. Allah says in the Quran, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Allah says the soul in the order and proportion given to it, and its enlightenment to its right and its wrong. And fujur and taqwa is very deep. We can't do this exhaustively. To try to translate these two terms, it will take hours, mashallah. So just appreciate the translation, that the enlightenment of the soul, as it becomes enlightened to its taqwa and its fujur, right? These two principles, these two possibilities in it. Translated is right and it's wrong. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, excuse me. He is successful who purifies it. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. He is a failure who neglects to purify it. Human life will not remain stagnant. Brothers and sisters, we are either progressing or regressing, one or the other. We're not staying in the same place because there's forces constantly working against us. If I sit a rock in the middle of a stream, the rock may look like it's staying still, but as water runs by the rock, it gets eroded, even if it's very slow, even if it's micro erosion. And over a long period of time, that erosion will become evident. Brothers and sisters, this is our faith. This is our behaviors. These are our characteristics. If we are not progressing, we are regressing, because if we're stagnant, we're actually regressing. So Allah makes it perfectly clear to us that the big success for the soul is the purification of it. And the big failure for the soul is the lack of purification of it. If you think of your soul like a garden has to be watched very carefully. For there are many things that can come and spoil your garden. There can be certain worms that spoil your garden. There can be certain insects that spoil your garden. There can be certain animals that spoil your garden. There can be certain plants that kill your garden. If weeds grow in your garden unchecked, the weeds, especially if they are invasive weeds, they're like a cancer. Weeds are like a cancer, and cancer is like a weed. It grows unchecked. It grows uncontrolled. And it invades the surrounding area and chokes what's supposed to be growing wholesomely. It chokes it out and kills it. Brothers and sisters, such is our behavior. So it's in this context that I want to make us aware of some weeds that may be in our garden. And if these weeds are in our garden, we have to work to get them out. Our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the most amazing and excellent human being ever to walk the face of the earth, who has produced the best theologians, who has produced the best philosophers, who have produced the best social scientists, who have produced the best artists. Excellence has come from the life example of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He modeled excellence, and excellence came out of his words and his instruction. So to help us, he gave us a roadmap to identify certain weeds that may be in our character that's killing us. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said there are 4 characteristics. أربع من كان فيه كان منافق خالصا. He said there's 4 characteristics that if you have them, you're a pure hypocrite. And he goes on further. And when we hear hypocrisy, it got to get our attention. It has to get our attention. The Sahaba weren't like us. We assume we boast of our faith and our deen and our righteousness. The Sahaba were always wondering if they were hypocrites. That's how much they feared Allah. They feared Allah so much that they were constantly concerned with displeasing Allah, not as like an OCD. That's not what I'm talking about. Not as like an OCD, but a taqwa of consciousness. Like think about your mother, how you're always conscious to serve your mother, how you're always conscious to please your mother. You're not always conscious to serve your mother and to please your mother because you have OCD. No, you're conscious about your mother because the connection that you have with your mother and the love that you have with your mother and the appreciation that you have with your mother. So when you develop a certain level of taqwa, you're constantly concerned with that relationship that you have with Allah. You value that relationship that you have with Allah so much so that you're constantly checking that relationship. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes on to say, and whoever has one of the following characteristics will have one characteristic of hypocrisy unless and until he gives it up. And I'm not saying this for you to start thinking about all the people who fit this description. That's how the shaitan gets us. Oh, that was a hypocrite. That's just a hypocrite. I know. You get in the group. No, they a hypocrite because I didn't identify all four signs in them. No, look right here. Look right here. Go look in the mirror. Because this is truly what changes. You have to do introspection and ask yourself these things. When I was in my CEDAR class, of one of the CEDAR classes, but the CEDAR class that made me fall in love with the CEDAR of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 1995. It's still burned in my head today. A lecture that I heard on, it was a 3-day seminar that I heard over a weekend, and it was so powerful that I heard it 29 years ago, and it's seared. Many of the things that were said that is seared into my mind. He was talking about hypocrites. And he was talking about Omar ibn al-Khattab and how after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam returned to Allah, as you know, eventually Omar becomes the leader. And he goes to the man's house who has a record of the hypocrites. And he asks him, so you have to imagine, he knocks on the door, and Omar was the hammer. Omar was a hammer. So when the man sees Omar at the door, may Allah be pleased with them both, he has to be interested in what Omar, radiallahu anhu, what he wants. So Omar asks him, do you have the names of the hypocrites? And he said, yes. He said, am I on the list? Omar said, am I on the list? May Allah bless us with an inkling of the taqwa that the Prophet Muhammad and his companions had. A little bit, inshallah. So what's the first characteristic? Whenever he is entrusted, he betrays the trust. That's the first one. And I want you to think about yourself, because there's big trust and there's little trust. Think about everything Allah has entrusted you with, in the roles that he gave you, the responsibilities that he gave you, the resources that he gave you. And ask yourself, how many times have I betrayed the trust that was put in me? And do I do that all the time? Because we all make mistakes. But some people, that's how they are. We call them untrustworthy. I can't, matter of fact, I never forget. I was working at this burn to go factory actually, and the manager told me I was working in loss prevention, and the manager told me I can't trust him as far as I could throw him, and this dude was like 260, so he couldn't throw him very far. So you know people who are untrustworthy, who always break their trust. You can't trust anything they say. They always make promises, never fulfill those promises. So if that's you, then work to change that. Work to change and try to fulfill your trust, because that's one of the characteristics of a hypocrite. Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and whenever he speaks, he tells a lie. Now, don't laugh when I say this, but now you're probably thinking all politicians are munafiq. You're probably thinking that. But ask yourself that. Ask yourself, how truthful am I? Ask yourself, how often do I not tell the truth? Think about all your relationships. And I'm not talking about when you may phrase certain things in order to be diplomatic, right? Because you can be diplomatic. Somebody might have a big jacked up head. You're like, big. You don't have to say, man, you got a big head. No. Say, God bless you with a beautiful head. You're not lying. You're just giving him something as a compliment. I'm talking about real life. So the hypocrite, when he's speaking, he's lying. He has a habit of lying. He is or she is a habitual liar. Now I have to give some context, because the munafiq in the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were faking Islam to undermine or to get some benefit from the ummah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they would fake like they were his big supporters, while at the same time undermining. So I have to mention that in the context of what I'm saying today, because a lot of that context may be gone. Meaning most of us, we're not faking to gain some political advantage. Most of us are probably hiding our Islam when we leave the mosque, as compared to faking Islam in order to gain some political benefit. So I have to say that. I have to put that in its context. But still, these are things to look for in yourself. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes on to say, and whenever he makes a covenant, he violates it. And this is in the context of something like a treaty, or like a pact, or some kind of agreement of non-aggression, or an agreement to protect the rights of others, or an agreement for mutual support. Whenever this hypocrite makes this kind of pact, he violates it. And it reminds me of Abdullah ibn Ubay, the hypocrite. He was the hypocrite's hypocrite. He was the model of hypocrisy, if there is. He was the infamous model of hypocrisy. Like when they came out for the Battle of Uhud, and there was only 1,000 people with them. And when Abdullah ibn Ubay saw the enemy, he broke away and took 300 people with him at the exact minute planned to demoralize the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his followers. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. And the final one, and I think this is one we all really have to work on. When he quarrels, he behaves in a very imprudent, evil, and insulting manner. I want you to think about the fights you have and think about your behavior in the fights, or the argument that you have, or the quarrel that you have, and see if you maintain the proper demeanor that a Muslim should have, that someone who believes in Allah and the last day and who's following Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See if you behave in that way, or do you immediately go to insults? Do you immediately start talking about people, talking about their mother, and talking about their children? You know, when I was growing up, if you wanted to fight, you talked about someone's mother. That was the code in my neighborhood. Everybody else you could talk about. You could talk about your uncle, your father. You could talk about your cousin. But don't talk about my mother. As soon as you talked about my mother, it was time for us to knuckle up. It was time for us to go to blows. Now that was mature. That was immature. That wasn't the way to be. But that was the how things were. So some people think about how you quarrel with your wife. Do you insult her? Do you berate her? Do you belittle her? Think about how you quarrel with your husband. Do you belittle your husband? Do you berate your husband? Do you insult your husband? Think about how you may quarrel with your family. Do you berate your family? Do you belittle them? Do you become insultive? Do you tell them things like you ain't no good? Do you tell them things like you're lazy? Do you tell them things like you ain't never been good? I've never seen anything good from you. One brother, when his wife wasn't cleaning up the house to his standard, he actually told her, "Who raised you?" He insulted her whole family. So, brothers and sisters, to remind us what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, he said there are four characteristics, and whoever has the following four will be a pure hypocrite. And whoever has one of the following characteristics will have one characteristic of hypocrisy unless and until he gives it up. Whenever he is entrusted, he betrays the trust. Whenever he speaks, he tells a lie. Whenever he makes a covenant, he proves treacherous. And whenever he quarrels, he behaves in a very imprudent and insulting manner. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله ولكم والحمد لله رب. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Dear brothers, can y'all move up? Can y'all move up some, inshallah? We're about to get a large rush, so please move up. And Allah says in the Quran, make room in assemblies. Make room in assemblies. So making room is being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a great blessing. We're spoiled. Many of us are spoiled. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it, inshallah. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّ فَأَتِ الذِّكْرَى. So for reminding benefits the reminder. I remember when, if there were 5 people at Juma, it was packed. 20 people, mashallah, it was really packed. So it's good now that Jumas are so packed that we have to make room in them. Brothers and sisters, as we conclude, I'm going to ask you and myself a question. And that is, do we trust Rasulullah sallallahu? And I say that not for cliche. Sometimes we make these statements for effect, or we make these statements because it's something that we should say. But I mean, honestly, go ask yourself if you trust Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if given the same circumstances, who would you trust? Would you trust Rasulullah or would you trust your psychologist? Would you trust Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or would you trust your therapist, your family therapist? Because our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam left all of the tools necessary to build a peaceful, brilliant, excellent society for others to follow and others to model their societies after. But the only way that we realize this is if we trust what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us. If we trust his instructions, if we trust his directions, we have to trust him more than money. And brothers, please leave a path there, mashallah. You're sitting in the path. The brothers have to get through to make wudu, inshallah. Jazakallah. Thank you so much for moving. May Allah reward you double and triple time for moving with expedience. So if we trust Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we won't quote his hadith like an afterthought. We won't quote his hadith without feeling the meaning of these hadith. If Trump comes out tomorrow, and this is not political, I'm not a Democrat. One time I talked about Trump in the Khutbah, and somebody sent the whole email that said I must have been supporting Hillary Clinton. We can talk about them all in the Khutbah. Because they're the President of the United States of America, or the former President of the United States of America. I'm not advocating for you to vote for them. I'm not advocating for you to vote against them. But what I'm saying is if Trump comes out and says something tomorrow, or if he gets elected and he says something, how many of you will take him seriously? How many of you will get scared? How many of you will feel nervous? Will feel the same way when you read something from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Feel that same brevity. Feel that same magnitude. Feel that same gravity as you feel when somebody in your current reality says something. Get the same faith and attention and importance when you read something from Allah's messenger, who addressed so many issues of the human condition. And this is one of them. Take true inventory. And if you have one of these characteristics, the world isn't over. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not fatalistic. He said if you have one, you're a hypocrite until you get rid of it. So that means if you lie all the time right now, you have a characteristic of a hypocrite. Get rid of it. Ask Allah for aid. Ask Allah for assistance when you're entrusted with something. If you always betray the trust, you're not a pure hypocrite. You have the characteristics of hypocrisy. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was such a brilliant social psychologist that he left room open for improvement. So that you wouldn't say, well, why do I even try? I'm a pure hypocrite. No. If you have a bad habit, work on getting rid of it. Human beings have bad habits. People have habits of hypocrisy. Work on getting rid of it. So you no longer have this habit. Oh, Allah help us understand the Quran. Oh, Allah help us understand the wisdom and words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh, Allah help us to submit to you fully. Help us to bow to you and accept your guidance that you gave us in the Quran and your guidance that you gave us in the life example of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Oh Allah, bless us with the strength not to put anything over them, to put the Quran and the life example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam over all other knowledge, over all other directions, over all other opinions, over all other thoughts. Let them be the light. Let them be the beacon by which we live our lives. Oh Allah, help your servants who are suffering all over the world. And there's so many places they're suffering. If we can't name them all in a short period of time. So those that we know and those that we don't know, oh Allah, please help them. Oh Allah, please aid them. Those who are under the hand of oppressors, remove the hand of the oppressor from them. Those who are being killed unjustly, oh Allah, forgive them their sins and bless them with paradise. Those who are victims of the war machinery of man, the evil war machinery of man, oh Allah, hold that machinery back from them. Oh Allah, protect them. Oh Allah, deliver them. Oh Allah, give them a better situation and a better future. والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. That's what I said to do. Make the line keep it straight. So you go to the line. When the children spoke heart to heart, please find me some time on your cell phone. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه، هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين، إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل هو الله أحد، الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Brothers and sisters, on the way out, please make sure that you're generous in your giving. There's three ways to give. In the box out front. Also, go to the reasons out front and begin to give by card. Please join us for a Wednesday night class. We're studying the prophets that aren't on the essentials. The Wednesday night class starts at 7:30, inshallah. So please join us for that discussion. May Allah bless you and your families with safe travel.